So my name is Sydney Grubb. A little bit about me, I guess. So I graduated from the University of Minnesota in 2019. I was in AMSA for 3 years, and my senior year, I was on the board. I served as a volunteer coordinator. So shout out to whoever's doing it now. And after I graduated, I took a gap year. I scribed in an internal medicine setting at a hospital. I don't know if you guys know what hospitalists are, but that's what I did. Highly recommend scribing just a little bit. So I took off a year and I scribed while I applied to medical school. I applied both MD and DO, and I ended up getting 7 interviews. I went to 6 of them, got accepted to 4 schools, and I ultimately ended up down here in Alabama at the Alabama College of Osteopathic Medicine, where I started my first year this fall.
Wonderful, thank you. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the difference between an MD and a DO is, and what the general differences in training looks like?
Sure. To be totally honest, I know there's like a lot of stuff going around in the news and y'all are probably kind of confused, but to be honest, there's really not that much of a difference. The only major difference is that DO students learn something called OMT, which is osteopathic manipulative treatment. And it's basically just ways of like manipulating like musculoskeletal elements, usually to relieve pain, but it can help with like a variety of diseases. So we have about 200 hours of that, in addition to everything else that we learned as doctors. We have our anatomy, we have our biochemistry, we have all of our systems courses, we have clinical skills course that we have for the whole 2 years that we're in the class. We also have a foundations course that basically just teaches you all the non-medical things about medicine, like ethics and insurance and all that stuff. But the main difference between MDs and DOs is that DO students do this manipulative treatment. So other than that, all of our classes are the same. We take different boards, technically. We take, as DO students, we take the COMLEX, and MD students take USMLE, but most DO students also end up taking USMLE too, just for the sake of like having scores that are easy to compare. After that, we do take the same licensing boards and everything. DOs can get certified to perform or practice in any specialty. I know personally at the hospital I was at, there was a cardiothoracic surgeon that was a DO, and he was pretty freaking great. So yeah, I know there's like a lot of rumors that DOs can't do certain specialties, and like that's just not true. I've met DOs from literally every specialty under the sun. Last year they had like 20 students that graduated from my school going to anesthesiology. Like you can really do anything. But yeah, that's pretty much it. The only big difference is that we do this manipulative treatment. Everything else is basically the same. There's no great, huge difference between us.
With your application into medical school, I know you mentioned you applied both MD and DO. Can you talk a little bit about like what the difference is between both application cycles and like which different types of experiences you might have needed between the two?
Overall, the applications were pretty similar. Obviously, there's different sites that you have to submit your applications to. They're set up similarly in that you need, you have to put in your personal statement and your classes and your activities. There were some minor differences in the word count limits for certain activities. I think the DO application, they had a limit of like 600 words, and the MD application had a limit of 700. But overall, they were pretty comparable. They both took a long time to fill out. So please fill them out soon. Don't wait till like 2 days before you can turn them in. The major thing I think that was different is that a lot of DO schools required you to have a letter of recommendation from a DO physician, which is easy enough if you shadow and you work with them. But if you're not scribing or you're not planning on scribing, I would at least think about shadowing someone, or I don't know, talking to someone about that, because a lot of schools do require that.
Were there any like with in terms of like the interview, did you happen to notice like, and maybe not, but did you notice any like differences that you felt when interviewing, or even not necessarily differences between MD and DO, but like kind of did you get a different like vibe from each school you interviewed from, and like how did that kind of impact your decision on where you wanted to go?
Yes, you definitely get vibes from schools you interview at. I can look back on every school that I interviewed at, and yeah, there was definitely like a marked difference between all of them. So this school is actually the first one I applied at, or sorry, the first one I interviewed at, and the first one I got accepted to. And I remember just going into this interview like straight up terrified because it was like August, like I had just graduated. I was like first medical school interview, and it was fantastic. It was so chill. Everyone was so kind and so sweet. And like, they went out of their way to like make you feel welcome and like ease your nerves. They didn't try and trick you with like questions, and they weren't like mean to you or anything. Like I felt super, super comfortable here. And even after I got accepted to all those other schools, like this was the place that I was like, dang, that place really made me feel like I belonged there, which is why I ended up going here. There was one school, and I won't say what it is because I don't want to turn anyone away, that the interview, I knew about 2 minutes in that I was not going to get in there because the interview was just very awkward and uncomfortable, and it just felt strained, and that's fine. Like, I'm glad I didn't go there. I'm glad I'm here, but you definitely get feels for different places, and I don't know. Every place is suited for like different types of people, so you just got to find what kind of matches what you're looking for.
Awesome. Do you have like any particular reason that you like wanted to pursue DO, or did you have anything that like guided you on which schools you applied to and like which schools you decided you didn't want to apply to?
Oh dear. So we're going to be totally honest here. So I got a very mediocre GPA and very mediocre MCAT, which was fine. So when I was applying, I just kind of had to be realistic about where I was going to apply to. Like, I like to think I'm smart, but there's no way your girl's getting into Mayo. So that's some advice I have, is like, everybody has their dream schools, and like that's awesome, but you got to kind of be realistic about where you apply to. So that narrowed down a decent number of the schools I applied to. I didn't really have any particular great feelings like MD or DO. It didn't really matter to me. I was fine doing either one because, like I said, they are very similar programs. But it was when I interviewed and toured the school, it was the vibe I got that made me want to come here. Like, there's a lot of really great schools that I like interviewed at, but it was just the people here and just the feel that made me want to specifically come here. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Did you use like MSAR at all to like look at schools in your original search?
I did, yes. So I don't know how much MSAR is. I did get that in order to help narrow down MD schools. For DO schools, a lot of them have the average GPA, MCAT, whatever, right on their website. Also, they don't have their own equivalent of MSAR. So for them, I just kind of had to look at the websites or like talk to old students or whatever. But yeah, that definitely helped. I would definitely recommend doing that.
Okay, sweet. All right. So for more specifically, like what you're doing in school right now, what does like your first year of DO school look like in terms of like classes and workload?
Ooh, so we are taking what I just found out is the equivalent of 22 credit hours a semester, which is a little rough. But so for us, like, I hope you guys know, your first 2 years of medical school is all classroom learning. So for the whole 2 years, we have a clinical skills class where we basically learn how to do physical exams and patient interviewing, all that stuff. We have our foundations class, which is all the non-medical things. We have that for the whole 2 years. We have our osteopathic manipulation class for the whole 2 years. So it's kind of nice that those are like very, very consistent. So like that doesn't change. The thing that does change is like the actual, I don't know what you call it, like science-y classes. So for our first half of the semester, we had gross anatomy with a dissection lab. So we basically covered everything about the human body, every bone, muscle, ligament, tendon, nerve, vein, everything in the human body in about 2.5 months, which was just as terrifying as you're thinking it is. But it's okay, we made it through. Now we're doing what's called molecular medicine, but it's basically a combination of biochem, immunology, genetics, all those science classes that you think you're never going to need again, but you actually do. And then once we get into next semester and then second year, they're all systems based. So I believe next semester we start with neuro. So we have everything about neuro, not just like the anatomy, but like the physiology and like the psych and all of that relating to neuro. And then we continue to go through other systems throughout the rest of the 2 years.
I'm gonna surprise you again with another extra question. Obviously you haven't gone through like your 4th year yet, but what does like your 3rd and 4th year kind of look like then in terms of your curriculum? And then do you know like at what point you start to do residency applications, or is that like you're kind of still learning about it?
Okay, I'm glad you asked because this actually is a little different for DO schools. So for us, at least at this school, I know a lot of other DO schools did this. Actually, some MD schools do it too. But after your first 2 years, you go out and do rotations. For us, we don't do rotations here. We go out to a site somewhere else in Alabama or Florida, and we rotate at that hospital clinic for 2 years. And every site has like 10 students or so. So kind of stinks you get like split up after 2 years, but a lot of schools do that, especially if they're not in like a super big city where they have 12 different hospitals for students to go to. So after 2 years, I'll go to a different site somewhere else in Alabama or Florida, and I'll be there for 2 years. 3rd year is all just rotations. 4th year has a couple mandatory rotations, and the rest are all electives. So I could rotate in something that I thought was interesting, or you can do what's called audition rotations, which is where you go to a hospital that you want to do residency at, and you basically rotate with them for a couple weeks just so they get to know you and your face is out there and you kind of get the vibe of the place that you're at. Yeah, and then I think you start applying for residency, I want to say fall of 4th year, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Don't totally quote me on that because they match in March, something like that. But yeah, that's what 3rd and 4th year look like.
Stuff. And do you know like how your school kind of determines like which site you go to, or is it kind of like randomized and you're like with a clump of like random students, or?
No, so partway through 2nd semester, they have people from all the sites come down and they give their little presentations and we can go talk to them. It's kind of like a job fair, but like for core sites. So we kind of get to go meet them and learn about like the special things about their site. And then we just rank the ones that we want to do, and they have some fancy algorithm thing that they match us up with. It's kind of like sorority match, I guess. That's what it's been compared to. So yeah, that's what we got.
Awesome. I think that's all like the specific questions that we had people submit. Is there any like parting best piece of advice that you would give pre-med students right now that like maybe you wish you would have done in undergrad, or like something to keep in mind for the future?
Oh, so many things. You have no idea. I finally get to share my wisdom with people. I'm so excited. First piece of advice would be, if you can, definitely take a gap year. Med school is very, very hard, and they don't take time to ease you. You don't get like a syllabus week. They just throw you in there, and it's really hard. I know personally, if I had gone straight from grinding my senior year to straight into medical school, I would have been burned out. So if you can, I would take a gap year. Definitely do something clinical. I know a lot of people do scribing, and like it's easy to be like, oh, everybody does scribing, I don't want to do that, but honestly, it's fantastic. I highly recommend. Like scribing taught me so much, and like starting med school, like I feel like I already knew some stuff because I had scribed for so long. So I think that was really helpful. I would definitely recommend doing something clinical. I had a friend that worked as an EMT. I have other friends that worked as like ER techs or worked at clinics, and I think that really helped. It also helps you get like connections with physicians to write you letters of rec, especially if you want to go into DO school and you need that DO letter of rec. Highly recommend. Oh goodness, I have so many pieces of advice. Follow up it to that is med school is really hard. So don't do it unless you really want to. Unless you're really passionate about being a physician, don't do it just because like you think that like, oh, it'll be cool to be a doctor and you're going to make a lot of money, because that's not going to be what carries you through the nights that you're up till 3 a.m. crying because you're so stressed. It's going to be the fact that you're doing what you love and you're going to save lives. So definitely don't do it unless you're passionate about it. And if you are passionate about it, you can do it. You'll make it work. Even if you don't get in your first time, or you think you don't have good enough grades, or you fail a class or whatever, like you can do it. I promise. I have friends that have applied several times. I have a friend that was a PA before this, and now she's in medical school. And like, there's so many like non-traditional people here. Like if this is what you want to do, like you will make it work. You can do this.
Yes. So like, not just the FigZab, but like coronavirus in general has caused a stir on Twitter about how like DOs aren't qualified enough or like aren't real doctors. I feel like you touched on this a little bit, but how, like I'm sure like you guys have talked a lot about it. How is like your school responding to that kind of backlash, and like what are you guys kind of, what's your point of advocacy? What's your stance on that kind of thing?
Ooh. Well, I'm just going to start off and say you will not believe how mad people got about that FIGS ad. Like, we were fuming for like days. Like, I have friends that straight up threw out their FIGS after that. Like, that was just, yeah, we were upset. And I think for good reason. It was obviously, I mean, everybody's seen that ad. It was very blatantly disrespectful towards DO physicians and female physicians, and especially female DOs. And as a female DO student, I was very, very hurt by that. But like you said, with coronavirus, it's brought up a lot of things to light about the differences between DOs and MDs. And I truly think it's just because DOs aren't as common as MDs, so people just don't know what to think. I believe the most recent statistic was like 11% of physicians are DOs, something like that. And like, people only usually have like a handful of physicians that they see over the course of their life. And if you've never seen a DO, you honestly probably don't know what that is. And that's fine. But I think it is important that people do understand that we are qualified physicians. We're just as qualified as MDs. And while COVID has had people obviously saying some inaccurate things about DOs, I think overall it kind of has helped in the end, just as like more people are now getting educated about what DOs are and the fact that they are qualified physicians. So even though it started off bad, I think in the end, this is going to have a positive effect, because regardless of what people think, like they're going to know what they are now.
I know you mentioned, obviously you've like met DOs in your scribing position. Did you feel like the rest of the medical community, like, did they pay any mind to the difference between MDs or DOs, or do you feel like it was just like, we're all the same?
I personally have never seen any kind of poor treatment towards DOs. Like, I've never had a doctor be like, oh, like, you're a DO? Yeah, no thanks. Like, I want somebody else. I've never personally experienced that. I'm sure it happens, but I've never seen it, and I'm grateful for that. At least I know down here in Alabama, like in the town that I'm in Alabama, the community is really, really supportive of the school, and they do all kinds of like fundraisers, and we do all kinds of community outreach things. So I think it's definitely getting better, I think. And now that these DO schools are kind of just popping up like weeds, I think that is kind of helping, at least in like communities like this, where a good chunk of the physicians are DOs and people now just know what they are and they support them. And I think it's getting better.
Was there anything that you felt like you needed to like justify, I guess? And how did you like spin that into a positive experience like during applications and interviews?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked this, because I think this has probably happened to a decent amount of people. I ended up having to retake organic chemistry too. The first time I took it, I got a C minus, which honestly at the time I was just happy that I passed. And then I found out later on a lot of med schools have a requirement that you need a C or better in all their required classes. So I found that out senior year, and I was very, very sad, but I ended up having to retake it. And I retook it, ended up with an A the second time, and that did come up in my interviews. They asked why it had gone so poorly the first time and why I retook it. And I basically just told them that the first time I took it, I was a sophomore in college. I was taking a lot of other really hard classes. I took several really difficult classes at the same time, and none of them ended up working out super great. I did not get a very good GPA that semester, so that kind of played into it too. And I basically talked about how I kind of learned my like limit of how much I could take and how much I could study. And that semester, well, it kind of sucked and it didn't go very well. It was a learning experience. And after that, I got a lot better about spacing out my more difficult classes, and I learned how to study better. Studying is definitely something that you learn how to do differently for different classes. And after that, I kind of just buckled down and figured out how to do it better. And my GPA went up after that. Like every semester it went up, because I took that really bad experience and I learned from it and I made it better. So if that happened to you, if you had to retake a class, if you failed, if you got a bad GPA one semester, just find a way to spin that into a positive experience about like what you learned from that, like how it affected you and how you changed in order to make it better. And I think that they really appreciated that, like, honesty from me, that I know it was bad, but I was able to make it into something better. And I did do better eventually. So that's, yeah. If you do badly in a class or have a bad GPA one semester, it's really not the end of the world, I promise. You can still get into medical school.
I think those are all of my questions, and I'm sure like you gave a lot of really, really great advice. And above all, like just hearing you say like you can do it, you can make it work, definitely makes me feel better. So
but yes, you can, I promise. It's crazy, but you can do it. It'll all be worth it. Every time I sit down and I'm like stressed and overwhelmed, just the thought that like I'm actually in the process of becoming a doctor, like this dream that I've had for the last like 8 years of my life is actually like in the process of being a reality. Like that just keeps you going. And like it's the best feeling in the world. So yeah, if you want to do it, like you can do it, I promise.